Good morning, everyone. Welcome. It's Monday morning, October the 2nd, 2023, and this is FPC Radio Live. And yeah, we got pretty much 99% of Week 4 in the books. Obviously, we have Monday Night Football tonight, Seahawks and Giants, and pretty eventful weekend nonetheless. Not just in the NFL either, John. And we are, excuse me, we're actually going to start in the NBA because, well, we got a little bit of a trade action, something that you anticipated, or at least had a inkling may happen. Jrue Holiday to the Celtics for quite a haul, and just like that, John, I want to comment the dynamic defensive duo of Marcus Smart and Time Lord are no mas, gone, just like that.
Yeah, I mean, this offseason has been pretty interesting for the Celtics. They essentially traded 4 for 2. So you traded Marcus Smart, Grant Williams, Malcolm Brogdon, and Rob Williams. In return, you get Jrue Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis. Like, if you were to rank those 6 players 1 through 6, Holiday would be number 1, Porzingis would be number 2, and then the 4 Celtics that were traded would fall into 3, 4, 5, and 6. So you got the 2 best players. You gave up 4 good players, role players, what have you. Now they're going to have to round out that roster with some depth pieces. But Jrue Holiday is a champion. He was a big part of Milwaukee winning the championship a couple seasons ago. He's an outstanding defender, as good, if not better, than Marcus Smart as a defender. And he's also a 40% three-point shooter, which is outstanding. Porzingis is a big who can shoot from the outside. So I love the moves the Celtics made. And I'm convinced now that Portland's management was never going to trade Damian Lillard to the Heat. And they were not going to trade Jrue Holiday to the Heat because, quite frankly, they were a little bit upset the way the Heat conducted themselves when Lillard announced that he wanted to go to the Heat. So now the Heat are clearly behind the Bucks and the Celtics, but good move for the Celtics getting a player like Holiday. You put him together with Derek White in the backcourt. That is a dynamic backcourt defensively, and they can score enough points to hold their own against some of the top backcourts in the league.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's going to sound silly, but let's forget about the outcome of the playoffs last year. The Celtics and the Bucks were already well ahead of the Heat, as were many other teams. I mean, I'm not going to sit there and completely dismiss their run, but this was a borderline playoff team to begin with, John, and they've done nothing at all to improve their roster. And I think the Bucks have obviously improved, and I think the Celtics have improved. I'm right there with you. Like we talked about this, I think, shortly after the season ended. Like the Celtics, that is, they couldn't come back and do the same thing again. Like there was going to have to be more than a couple tweaks here and there, because we've seen this roster, as talented as it is, reach the Eastern Conference Final, reach the NBA Final, but never really. It just never felt like they were going to get over that hump, and you kind of you're treading water essentially for 3 or 4 years. Which, look, that's a very envious position to be in, relative to some other franchises. Like if you're the Knicks and you're saying, man, I could have gone to the Eastern Conference Final and the NBA Finals and 4 times in 5 years, blah blah blah, all that stuff, you'd be thrilled. But the reality of it is, John, that's not the expectation here. And after you have had these young superstars for as long as you had, and you've gotten so close but not quite there yet, you're starting to get impatient, and I think that's a good thing. Sometimes impatience can be a bad thing, but I like that they went proactive. Now again, the great thing and worst thing about Celtics fans is their loyalty. Okay, and you I'll give you credit, John. You've been pretty emotionally detached from Marcus Smart. You appreciate his abilities, but certainly not someone that was like, there's no way we can trade Marcus Smart. And Robert Williams, fan favorite, absolutely great player when he's healthy. And I think you're excited to see him play, but then at the same time you're always holding your breath, like what's going to happen if he gets dinged up and all of a sudden a guy you rely on is on the shelf, and all of a sudden you have no bigs, really. Because pretty much that's what happened last year, John. I mean, Al Horford was your backup, essentially.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at Robert Williams, the third, averaged about 800 minutes per year. That's just not enough. You've got a player in Jrue Holiday who will give you 2,300 minutes per year. He's a workhorse.
Yep.
He's outstanding on both ends. So you're getting someone you can depend on, someone who can do so many things on the basketball court. And I think they had to change the makeup, right? I think that Marcus Smart had to go because he felt he was the leader of the team. And let's face it, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are miles ahead of him as players. And usually the best player, or at least the second best player, becomes the leader of the team, not the fifth or sixth best player. Malcolm Brogdon had to go because they already traded him 3 months ago. He wasn't happy that happened, so you had to move on from him. Grant Williams was too expensive to keep, and Rob Williams, you have to give up something to get something. So those are the 4 guys that moved on. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do in terms of filling out the rest of that roster, which they need in the regular season, not so much in the postseason.
Right. And I will say this, and this may or may not make sense. I should preface a lot of things that I say with that statement, but I don't think this is your traditional addition by subtraction with Marcus Smart. Like, I think it just like sometimes with a coach, sometimes it's just time to move on. And I don't think because yes, I agree with you that he was a leader though. I mean, that's the thing. He was a leader. He wasn't a guy that was overstepping his bounds. But to your point, this team needed to be the Jays. That's whose team it has to be, and it has to follow their identity. And right now, that looks like this is going to be a far more offensive minded team. Obviously, I mean they have an entire starting 5 of shooters, essentially.
Joe Mazzulla's quite happy because he likes the 3-point shot, and you've got guys that can excel at that position, including Kristaps Porzingis, who can get you around 37, 38%. Tatum and Brown. Brown's not a real good 3-point shooter. I would like to see him slashing more to the basket. Tatum is very streaky from 3. Look, Holiday's a 40% 3-point shooter. That's pretty outstanding. Now, he got a lot of open threes because of Giannis. Giannis draws a lot of attention, which hopefully you see Jason Tatum doing. And Derek White is just really an outstanding player. Like, you start White, Holiday, Porzingis, Tatum, and Brown. That's the best starting 5 in the NBA. And that's what I want them to go with. I don't want to hear about Al Horford in the starting lineup because you got to watch his minutes and he can't play back-to-back games. Go with those 5 guys I mentioned as your starting lineup and your closing lineup, and then you build your bench around that accordingly. I mean, Horford's going to be 38 in June. How much can you rely on him?
Right, and to be fair, like you want him to able to play in June. I mean, and you don't the off season. The regular season really doesn't matter. It does, but it doesn't. And to your point, like yes, you need that depth in the regular season to get through the regular season and to be healthy, most importantly, not necessarily to, win games. I mean, you can win, like you could trot out your starting 5, 48 minutes a day and probably win most of your games. Now they'll be exhausted and likely will probably get injured, but you're going to win pretty much a lot of your games. The problem is by the time the playoffs roll around, they're going to get their ass handed to them because, well, guess what? All these other teams are going to start playing most of their starters most of the time, and they're just going to run out of energy. So to your point, you need the depth in the regular season, not so much in the playoffs. I like Al Horford. I love Al Horford. Actually, I think he's a great player on this team. He's you got to use him right, John. You got to use him right. You can't. This isn't 31-year-old all-star Al Horford. This is savvy veteran, with the ability. I mean, remember the Celtics 08 title run where they won the champions. Think about some of the guys on the bench there that played key minutes. Yep. PJ
Brown.
Yeah, PJ Brown. Yep. Thank you. Yep. Again, I mean, these guys aren't guys that are going to be logging a ton of minutes. So it doesn't make them not useful. It just means, well, you just got to use them at the right time. And the right time would be, well, like you mentioned, June, May, those are the clutch months there. So, I really like the trade. Obviously it's exactly what I think we were both kind of thinking the Celtics needed to do. Like you said, change the makeup of the franchise, not just a couple tweaks, don't add a veteran shooter to come off the bench and all this. You want to change without obviously hitting the main part, and this is exactly what the Celtics did. They didn't disrupt the leaders. You bring in Porzingis, you bring in Holiday, they're not going to be the alpha, quote unquote, in this lineup. So you don't disturb that dynamic. And you also give that dynamic more of an opportunity to thrive with some of the departures that we talked about, like Marcus Smart and, kind of that, they're not obviously going to completely dismiss the defensive side. I still think they're a pretty darn good defensive team, but clearly they're putting more of a emphasis on offense and to your point, the 3-point shooting, because look, we've seen it 5, 6, 7 years now. They live and die by the 3-point shot. And more often than not, when they have their most frustrating losses, it's when they have this incredibly long, cold stretch of 3-point shooting. And look, that's not too dissimilar to many other teams in the NBA, but the Celtics seem to just commit to it and they can't get out of it. So how do you fix that? Well, maybe not change your ways that way. Just bring in better 3-point shooters and more 3-point shooters. And there you go.
Yeah, I mean, when they can shoot 40% from three, they're nearly unbeatable. When they shoot below 40% from three, they're a 500 team. And I also think there was a dynamic here with Joe Mazzulla that Malcolm Brogdon and Marcus Smart was his two biggest critics. So I think at some point, Brad Stevens is like, we've got to move these guys out of here if we're all committed to Joe Mazzulla. You don't generally see that in the NBA, but Smart and Brogdon aren't elite enough players that you have to maneuver around them. You can show them the door and bring in someone like Holiday, who is a quiet leader, and maybe he can even help Brown and Tatum become better leaders, because I think he helped Giannis grow as a leader in Milwaukee, because he's got that type of respect going forward. So, yeah, exciting move by the Celtics. It would look like the Celtics and Milwaukee on a collision course to meet the Eastern Conference Finals. We thought that was going to be the case last year, but I think even stronger this year, because I can't see Miami crashing the party again. As things kind of fell in place for them last year, give them credit. They took advantage of what was going on, and they got to the finals, and then they were manhandled by Denver. But the Celtics and Milwaukee seem to be on a different level right now than the rest of the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, including, obviously, like you just said, Miami, and also the 76ers, who really haven't done anything at all.
No, wait for James Harden, who, wanted to get traded, then didn't want to get traded, wants to get traded. No one wants James Harden.
Yeah.
So,
that might be an example of an addition by subtraction, regardless of the talent right there. And I mean, it seems to have been the case in a lot of places he left. But anyways, I just saw Joe Burrow get rocked on my television, so it might be time to start shifting over to the NFL, because we got a lot to talk about in the next 22 some odd minutes. But excuse me. We'll start with last night's game, because I thought that was fascinating, because we neither of us really gave the Jets a chance, but they were certainly well within that game last night. And to be honest, I don't think that was a holding call. Like I don't think it was. I think I would have to clarify. I read more of the rule book to kind of get more of a more clarity on this particular offense, because I think it's pretty clear that Sauce Gardner, or Gravy Gardner, as we talked about yesterday. Let's just start calling him that on here, Gravy Gardner.
Yeah, I like that.
I like it. We're very friendly to the Paisans. We appreciate the tradition. So, I don't think I think it's very clear he didn't close his hand or grab at all. You know what I mean? I think this is a situation where he had his hands on his body, and whether it was due to a forceful move by Gardner, or just the natural movement of MVS trying to break through hand checking, I don't know. But you know what I mean, John? So my instinct says I thought it was a bad call. There was a lot of bad calls for both teams in that game. The face mask, again, something I probably would need to get a little bit more clarity on. I mean, if it's a matter of, I believe if the rule does state that the offense has to begin, depending on where it begins is where the penalty is enforced. So in this case, if it was outside the end zone, then it wouldn't be a safety, which is what they called. And the initial pull on the face mask did begin outside of the end zone. So that's probably, if that's exactly how the rule is written, then that's a bad call, and obviously favored the Jets in this case. But very clearly, I mean, the offense continued well into the end zone, and he was pulled down into the end zone. So whether or not the ref decided that that was, the initial contact wasn't the enough to call a penalty, you know what I mean? So the ref
Mm-hmm.
obviously used their judgment and waited until the offense was egregious enough. So again, I if the rule is how I originally laid it out, then yeah, that's probably a bad call. So I'm basically saying this to say I'm not saying one team benefited one way or the other, but I did think that holding call was, whew, I mean, that was an ugly just duck by Mahomes that I mean, I hate to say the word get bailed out, but I mean, kind of got bailed there because there was no this offense, if there was one, did not completely change the outcome of that play. That was just a hope and a prayer hucked up there, and there was a lot of those from him last night. So this isn't just like, oh my god, just out of the norm. No, this is kind of, he played a sloppy game, and even on that big run. Forget about the fact I laughed at this, John, and this wasn't any sort of criticism, but I thought it was hilarious. I don't know if you saw the replay. I'm sure you did, of how much space was just open in the middle of the field. I mean, it was incredible, John. You could fit like three like big 18-wheeler trucks side by side, all three of them, right down the middle of the football field, and I don't think you touch a single defender. And so
Mm-hmm.
this was why Patrick Mahomes was able to run 23 yards. It's like, I'm not taking away his ability to run, but John, it I mean, it was comical how open it was, and even the only defender between him and the first down marker, who was following another guy, I mean, literally ran the other way. It was like they all, like, if you're playing someone like your little cousin on like Madden or something, you want to allow them to score. You switched all the defenders and just kind of run them off the screen. That's what it looked like, John. Like, it was hilarious. But in all seriousness, that was an egregious miss of a hold. I mean, there was a very obvious hold committed by the Chiefs on that play that I mean, even opened that whole situation up. So again, the officiating was really bad last night, and we say that quite often after a lot of these games, especially the ones that are in the national spotlight, because everyone's watching.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of Mahomes' ability to run, I think because in certain situations you're so fearful of his arm, right, that you're backing up. You're also watching the sidelines because he can throw to the sidelines, which not every quarterback can do at that level. And all of a sudden, the middle will sometimes open up. But again, it's kind of like a Steph Curry effect, where because the guy can shoot from 45 feet, it does open up things for the rest of his teammates. So yeah, that was just a sloppy game. But Kansas City, now 5 straight AFC Championship games, they've kind of replaced the Patriots as a team that sometimes doesn't necessarily have to play great, but they find a way to win. Like the other team makes mistakes, or they just make one big play at the end, whether it's a run, a throw, a defensive stop, that they get by. We saw this with the Patriots for 19 years. It's just sometimes you watch a game at the end of it, go, how do they find a way to win that thing? They weren't necessarily all buttoned up. They weren't great, but they just were smarter, or they just would make one more play. Kansas City kind of is falling into that because they haven't looked impressive at all this year.
But I would
Bears, but they're kind of they're finding ways to win, which they have for now 5+ seasons.
But I would add this one big difference though, because a lot of these issues and struggles have been pretty consistent. And the only good offensive game came against the Bears, and I mean, come on, it's the Bears. I mean, let's be real here. The big difference though, John, is that, and we're talking about kind of comparing what the Patriots did. The Patriots offensively started with mediocre talent, and I hate saying that, but it's all relative to what Kansas City has had. Certainly, the first 5 years of Mahomes' career. So I think there was more confidence that the Patriots could kind of win any form or fashion, because that's kind of what they were doing to win Super Bowls. You know what I'm saying, John? Does that make sense? Like,
True.
I,
Yeah,
I
but
think
again, we can differentiate the first half of the dynasty and the second half of the
sure. Oh,
dynasty,
sure. Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Because they're so different. Yeah. So
Absolutely. But
maybe we were just on different spectrums in terms of where we were in that
well,
type of thing.
well,
You know,
the thing is though, I think there's no certain like we're 5 weeks into the season, and the Kansas City Chiefs offense doesn't look special
nope.
at all, and it may be a coincidence, but it may not, because all of a sudden this is the first year. I mean, last year, look, there was still talent there. I mean, Travis Kelsey was peak Travis Kelsey last year. He hasn't been quite the same this year, whether that's age or still recovering from injury. But this is the first time that Patrick Mahomes hasn't been surrounded by a large amount of talent. I mean, we talked about it earlier in the season when he played the first game without Travis Kelsey. It was only the fourth game out of almost 100 games where he didn't have an all-pro player on offense. Like that's kind of remarkable. And on the flip side, John, it took Tom Brady until his 108th game of his career to play with an all-pro player. And that was Randy Moss. So
Okay, Aaron Rodgers till 2014 to have an All-Pro player, and that was Devontae Adams, who was a rookie at the time, didn't become an All-Pro till later.
oh, well,
So, yeah,
and that's and look, that's kind of like, that's kind of the thing. We're starting to see, like, all right, well, now can Patrick Mahomes, the guy that everyone says is this, he's a tier above everyone else, and like he's already on GOAT pace. I mean, let's not forget, John. We're judging him based on how he's covered. Like, if anyone was watching the game, and I hope you didn't eat anything right before the end of it, because Chris Collinsworth's monologue was just nauseating, because it felt like a guy that needed to force that in there. Like, he was so desperate to just completely fawn over Patrick Mahomes all game, but there was no reason to. So, they took this situation where he slid. It was the greatest slide in NFL history, and kind of really prop it up when this was like, okay, Isaiah Pacheco was 120 yards, touchdown, and defense was making plays and this, that, and the other, and it's like, this is the guy that everyone's saying is going to be the next greatest of all time. He's going to be this. He's this much better than everyone else, and he may be a lot better than some of his peers this now. But I don't know if that's more of an indictment on his peers or a celebration of his talent, because I look around the league and I see a lot of terrible quarterback play each and every week from quote unquote elite guys. Like, I'm almost certainly after these first 5 weeks, I feel like Joe Burrow might be a top 5 quarterback by default, because I don't know if there are 5 really good quarterbacks in this league right now. So, so to me, it's just he's held to the standard because, well, I think people have prematurely elevated him to that. And you know what? If you think it's unfair criticism, well, it's unfair criticism. But the offense hasn't looked good, John, and I think there's reason to be, at least, I don't want to say concerned, but reason to kind of perk up and say, well, maybe they can't just get by with subpar talent. Maybe they need these guys that need to create space, because, John, let's face it, every quarterback can throw accurately. I'm not, I can sit here and say, Mahomes isn't as accurate as people say he is, and people will say, oh, look at this throw, or they'll find 1 or 2 or 3 throws, and I'm like, okay, yeah, of course you can find that from everyone. You look at Eli Manning. He may have thrown the greatest pass in history down the sidelines to Mario Manningham. Doesn't mean he was a super accurate quarterback consistently. And I don't know if that's the case with Patrick Mahomes, because we really haven't seen him in a situation where he has to consistently throw to covered wide receivers, or throw to players that aren't consistently getting schemed open and have, this quote unquote superior talent based on their defense. So yeah, I think there is a little bit of concern, and yeah, they may still win some of these games against the Jets and against the Bears, but based on what we've seen in the first few weeks, do you think they're beating the Bills?
Depends on which Josh Allen shows up, right?
Well,
let's
assume it's. I think for the most
Josh
part,
Allen in the last 3 weeks, I don't
yeah,
know who's beating the Bills.
Yeah.
the last 3 weeks he's played at an MVP level. I mean, he's been the best player best quarterback in the
Mm-hmm.
sport the last 3 weeks. Now he was horrible in week 1, and you know what? I'm starting to think it's just a thing against the Jets. Like he played
Yeah.
poorly against the Jets, and look, the Jets have a good defense, right? I mean, they were good last night. I mean, they got down 17
for the second half, sure, yeah.
Yeah, second half. The first half was kind of like, where are they? Did they think the game was starting at 9:30?
Yeah, well, well, the biggest biggest pass play was a wide open throw to someone who literally didn't have a defender within 15 yards.
Right.
And that kind of gets back to what I was saying before about, well, let's see what happens when Mahomes is forced to consistently throw to tight covered receivers and not, ideal situations week in and week out. So
yeah, no, I mean, I think right now Buffalo looks pretty impressive, right? They just blew out 3 teams, including Miami yesterday. So yeah, they look like they're back on track to being a Super Bowl contender. Meanwhile, Cincinnati's 1-3, and twice this year they've scored exactly 3 points. I think they've scored 45 points this year, which is 11 per game, which is actually less than the Patriots are scoring. And again, I don't know. Does Cincinnati at this point to say this season's not going to happen? Let's just rest Joe Burrow and make sure he's okay for the next year, because you've already committed a ton of money to him. It's not like he's going to leave after next year.
Yeah, look, I mean, if he is injured to the extent that we may think he is, you got to shut it down, because first of all, he's dealing with a calf strain, and we already kind of joked, like, don't be going to Aaron Rodgers to talk about how to deal with a calf strain. And then you saw him yesterday flexing that elbow, and you're just like, oh my God, dude, just like, just feel like it's just waiting to break type thing, and like you think about the elbow, his throwing elbow. It's like, look, if this is a situation, just shut it down, because this season is lost. They're not a good team, John. I mean, this isn't just some bad fortune, bad luck. They're getting beat by bad teams pretty handily. And look, Joe Burrow hasn't been good, and you can blame it on the injuries. That's fair to say that those are probably hampering him. But if you're out there, John, you can't play that bad. Certainly can't play that bad when you're getting paid that much money, and you're considered, like I said, a quote unquote top 5 quarterback. And hey, he may be, but that's not necessarily because of his skill, because, well, again, quite frankly, I don't know if there are 5 great quarterbacks in this league. And that's kind of, it's a shame, John. It's a shame.
Yeah, and again, a lot of the guys that we perceive as these top 5, top 10 quarterbacks are so young that now they're trying to deal with not having success, right? So, like, this is kind of something new for Patrick Mahomes to deal with, that he doesn't have a Tyreek Hill. He didn't have him last year, and he still was able to win the Super Bowl, so give him a lot of credit for that. But now Travis Kelce may not be the same player he was a year ago. Burrow's dealing with these injuries. These are all new things for these young quarterbacks. They have to kind of figure out how to deal with it. Deal with coming off a really bad game like Josh Allen did in the opener. Well, he's passed that test the last 3 weeks, so we'll see what happens going forward. So they're still very young, and they haven't accomplished enough maybe to say that these are the 3 best quarterbacks in football. I think Mahomes certainly is. I mean, the guy does have 2 Super Bowl wins. Can't take that away from him. But Allen and Burrow are going to still have to prove more, and also kind of fight through some of the tougher parts of being a quarterback. It's not always perfect for you. You have to fight through that.
Well, and look, this will be my opportunity to prop up the guy that doesn't play anymore. But and I always contended that he was still the best in the league through 2021. So again, kind of.
I'm glad you brought him up.
Yeah, well, I didn't even say his name.
He's not playing either, so we're both still very sad.
Yeah, we're both sad old guys that just kind of wish they were still playing. But
we're 2 old guys at the mall drinking coffee.
Quite frankly, though, it's like, I mean, hell, Brady can still play, and based on the landscape of this league, I mean, he'd be certainly right up there. But the point is like, all right, as great as Patrick Mahomes was, it's like, I think as time goes on, we're going to sit there and say, well, Brady. I like that. I should change that. Good. Kyle says on this episode of FPC Brady-O Live. Yeah. Hey, look, like fair is fair. It is what it is. No, I just look. I thought he was still the best quarterback through 2021, and last year was last year, and I kind of begrudgingly accepted that the mantle was passing it, and that was obviously easier because, well, he's no longer retired, so I can kind of say that. But the point is, John, it's like this idea that one guy has such a huge gap between him and the other. It's just absurd. And I think that's what, why we get these like ridiculous back and forth conversations all the time. It's like, because we watch what we watched last night, and then you have Trey Wingo tweeting, shamelessly about the amazingness of his slide and this and his will to win and all this stuff. And I'm just like, oh my God. Like he's got like a
quarterback in the league that can slide, because he's the only one apparently who played baseball, right?
Yeah.
Like Russell Wilson can slide too. He was actually a better baseball player.
Well,
until Kyler Murray comes back, he's even better than both as a baseball player.
You remember we were talking about this last week, and kind of the reaction to the excuse me, the improvisation of Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes. And I made a comment about how Jeff Schwartz came on and was talking about how they do it like unlike we've ever seen before. And I just roll my eyes to the point where it almost makes me dizzy. And then yesterday, like we're seeing that we saw that with Randall Cobb and Zach Wilson. We saw that they made mention of like, oh wow, that was Randall Cobb didn't even plan to run that route, but they improvised. And then there was like 3 or 4 other examples, and I'm just sitting there laughing like, see, this is what we get. You get these people with big followings shamelessly going up and just basically lying to prop up a guy that doesn't need to be propped up. Like that's the thing, John. You can appreciate Mahomes' greatness without these outrageous and absurd, like over the top exaggerations or just outright lies. So it's like, that's what I think frustrates people. So now when they struggle, well, of course you're going to get some blowback. But I think the reality of it is, if you take a step back, you look at, ignore the over the top positivity, ignore the over the top negativity, and just kind of look at the reality of it is. And this is a guy who has consistently relied on yards after the catch more so than any other player in the league. So in order to consistently get that, you need to, one, have a really good offensive coordinator with the ability to scheme players open. That remains to be seen with Nagy, and what impact, obviously, the loss of Bieniemy is going to have. Andy Reid's still there. Let's be honest, but that's a situation. But you also need players that are good enough to do it, John. You can't just slap, random receivers in and say, oh, go get open by 15 yards. You just can't do that. And we're seeing those issues now. Like there was at one point in the game last night, John, they were talking about his pass attempts and how none of them were going to wide receivers. And that's not out of the norm. I mean, let's put it this way. The location of the throws is not out of the norm for Patrick Mahomes. Like these announcers were acting shocked that he was throwing the ball short. And I'm like, that's what he does. That's what he does. And he gets a lot of yards after the catch. So if he's not getting that, of course the offense is going to struggle. And now it's on him to elevate players around him. And that's where I think the questions are starting to come in, where it's like, is he going to be able to do that like Tom Brady? Like, well, I'll say Peyton Manning, but, again, that might be a bad example because, he had a lot of really great talent around him too. But there's a lot of other great quarterbacks out there. I just say Brady because, well, he's the guy that everyone was comparing him to. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how that offense kind of works its way throughout the season and whether or not they can improve. Which, I mean, you got to give them the benefit of the doubt. But right now, there's obviously a lot of I don't know, questions for sure.
Oh yeah, I mean, it doesn't look the way it looked before. I mean, remember his first 5 years in the league or as a starter, like they were undefeated in September, and he hadn't thrown an interception in the month of September. It felt like in his entire career, and that's changed. He had a pick 6 in the opener. He had a couple of interceptions last night. He had one against Jacksonville back in week 2. So yeah, he struggled a little bit. But like I said, they found ways to win, and now we're going to see what they're all about when they start playing teams like Philadelphia and Dallas. Those are 2 teams that are on their schedule. I think Philadelphia is on their schedule later in the season. Obviously, Buffalo is a division winner in the past. If Cincinnati ever gets it right, they'll face them later. But yeah, you get a much better idea of what they're all about when they face those teams.
Well, and this is the other thing too. It's like when people get on Twitter and yeah, congratulations to the Hamilton Tiger Cats, Kyle, for clinching the CFL playoff spot for the 5th straight season. Big fan, lifetime fan. Actually, I don't know. I haven't watched too much Canadian football. I just know Kyle. Kyle supports it. If anyone supports it, Kyle definitely supports it. Completely lost my train of thought. I got distracted by CFL football here, John. What's going on? What's going on here?
Are we ready to do a podcast on CFL? Like, we got to have some format for that, right?
Well, Kyle will kind of steer the ship when it comes. He'll steer the ship when it comes to that. But no, what I was going to say was these announcers and people on Twitter are acting shocked that, like, oh my God, this is not like Patrick Mahomes to throw these interceptions. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, you wouldn't be as shocked if you were paying attention and not ignoring things like turnover worthy plays. I mean, the guy there was it 2021 and 2020 and 2021. I was just kind of confusing myself there. He had really, and we talked about this before. He had a lot of interception luck. Let's be honest. I mean, the numbers lay it out. I mean, whether or not you want to sit there and accept turnover worthy plays, I know it's subjective, but at least gives you kind of an idea of where the ball's going. And what we saw with our eyes, which was there was a lot of dropped interceptions, John. And not just like tipped. We're not talking about like, oh, the defender like tipped it with his hand. We're going to call that a drop. No, we're talking about like, ball in the hand, like CJ Mosley yesterday. If you want to nitpick, there's another example right there where it's like a bad throw that, didn't get intercepted, but it doesn't mean it's not a bad throw. It's still a bad throw. So, it's just something we're going to watch throughout this season and see. Right now, if you're going to ask me, can they beat the Bills? Can they beat the Eagles? I'm going to look at last week or yesterday and say, well, it's probably the kind of like the Jets with the Bills, the Commanders with the Eagles. Because like that's the only like home game loss against the division that Jalen Hurts has had, I think, in the last like 10 games or something like that was to the Commanders last year. So either way, John, it's fascinating, and we'll get to plenty more tomorrow, I'd imagine, especially the Patriots, who, 38-3, man, that was rough. I don't even know if I have the energy to start that topic today. We certainly don't have the time, so we will leave that till tomorrow. So is that okay with you, John? Can you hold off talking about the Patriots for one day?
I'll be ready to talk tomorrow.
Okay, good. All right, well, that's going to do it for us here on FPC, or FPC Radio Live, as Kyle likes to refer to. But I didn't really even talk about Tom Brady that much. I've talked about Brady a lot more on many other shows before. So. And perhaps I will in the future. Maybe tomorrow. It'll be all Brady Appreciation Day. So anyways, that's going to do it for us here today. We will be back tomorrow. We'll talk about Monday Night Football. We'll give some more comments on this weekend because there are plenty more. And we will move forward. Maybe we'll get another NBA trade. You never know. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.